In this video, we're actually going to write, in a sense, the example for the argument essay. And what I mean by that is we're going to go paragraph by paragraph to see what it looks like when we flesh out the ideas we went over in the brainstorm lesson. So first off, if we look here, we have write the intro, which of course makes a lot of sense, followed by write the body and write the conclusion. So let's first deal with writing the intro. But before we do that, here is the example argument. So you may want to pause it here just to refamiliarize yourself with it, as well as the directions. Okay, moving on then, the intro. The intro is something that you should keep short and sweet. The reason I say this is because people want to belabor or spend too much time on the intro trying to say something profound. And of course they waste a lot of time and they don't get to the most important part of the essay, which are the body paragraphs, where you really analyze and take apart and identify the fallacies in the paragraph. So what I mean by keep it short and sweet is use standard boilerplate language. For instance, the following argument is flawed for numerous reasons, ... That's a great way to start the essay. Now, you don't have to use the exact words, but you can use something similar. Again, you're not agreeing with any part of the paragraph. You're showing that it is flawed. Here's an actual example intro that I wrote using this boilerplate as the beginning sentence. You'll note going on here, I just basically recap the main parts of the argument. Primarily, it is based on the unwarranted assumption. You can see this is pretty boilerplate or standard language. Here it's a little more specific, but in essence, I'm identifying the main fallacies that the argument assumes that the two cities are the same. And because of that, the main conclusion is not valid. Again, going back to that boilerplate language, this should take you a minute or so to write, and then it's on to the important stuff. And of course, the important stuff is the body. I like to focus on three logical fallacies. Maybe there's an overarching one, as we have here with the difference between the two cities, or assuming the two cities are similar. And you can, of course, house that under two paragraphs and then throw in another fallacy that's not necessarily tied to that. Or you can have three separate logical fallacies that, of course, use or identify a different part of the paragraph. Now, it's a good idea to have a paragraph for each fallacy. Even if the fallacies are related, still break it up the paragraph. It's a lot easier to organize it, and you'll score more points than just lumping or dumping one big paragraph down there. Finally, it's important to note that you're not just identifying logical fallacies and elaborating upon them, but you're actually trying to strengthen the argument or showing what evidence would be needed to strengthen the argument, or even vice versa. If certain evidence were to come to light, they would refute or disprove the argument, so either strengthen or refute. So let's take a look here at the first fallacy that we identified in the previous video with the brainstorming. And that fallacy was Littleville versus Biggsburg, and the assumption that they're similar, or as we called in a previous video, apples versus oranges fallacy. So how do we actually turn this fallacy into a nice paragraph? Well, there we have it. Now again, this is my writing, but it's still pretty generic, fails to provide any justification. I mean, you can use those words in almost any essay. Of course, don't copy them necessarily word for word, because that's a little plagiaristic. But the spirit, the essence of those words, that's what you want to develop your own boilerplate language. Then I get down to the more specific stuff. For one, the residents of Biggsburg may be wealthier than those of Littleville. So I'm not just saying, oh, they're saying these two cities are the same, but they're probably different. I'm being specific. I'm saying, well, what about wealth? This is important, clearly, because we're talking about a high-end mall with boutique stores. Going on here, more significantly, the argument states that the malls hope to attract wealthy clientele, going back, of course, to that high-end stores. And we show that if Littleville, in fact, is made up of middle or lower class people, then this assumption totally falls apart that, oh, all these wealthy customers are going to come shop there, because there really aren't that many wealthy customers in the area. Now you may think, oh, that's great. That's the end of that paragraph. While it's tempting, again, we want to go back to this idea of strengthening. What evidence would strengthen this argument? What do we need here? Well, in this case, had the argument provided information regarding the similarity in the income levels of the two cities' residents, then, of course, we would have a lot more information, a lot more validity to the argument. Notice I end with, even then, the argument would have to further prove that, like the citizens of Biggsburg, those of Littleville are likely to spend money at a mall. And so even if we assume, yes, there's evidence that, sure, Littleville's got plenty of rich people, are those rich people necessarily going to spend this money at this mall? And so again, showing some doubt even with this additional evidence. We shouldn't say, oh, we have this additional evidence, therefore it is completely 100% proven the argument. No, it's a question of it strengthens the argument, but there are still some reservations. Now the point is, after these 4 lines and the 7 or 8 lines that we had before, those should form one paragraph, one solid, convincing paragraph, while you've shown that Littleville and Vicksburg are not necessarily similar. Now you can even write more and show how they could be different for another pertinent matter. I think in this case, wealth really just jumps out, and I don't think it's necessary for you to think of another reason they could be different, though there could be a reason. I think it's better to jump onto the next fallacy, which shows that that two things aren't alike, apples and oranges, but it doesn't focus on the cities so much as the actual districts or areas. But coming back to the point is that you can sometimes make this paragraph even longer if you can identify some other differences that you feel are important. So while this video should show you a general structure, don't feel you have to follow it exactly for every single prompt, because the prompts or the paragraphs differ a little bit. Now that said, let's go on to the second fallacy. As I mentioned a second ago, the apples versus oranges is now applying to a constructed zone outside the city versus a downtown district in a fashionable neighborhood. Two very different things, clearly. And so the way I flesh that out is as follows. General topic sentence, first sentence, followed by, even if the residents of Littleville are wealthy enough to patron boutique stores, they're not necessarily likely to travel to this zone. How far is the zone? It could be outside the city. It could be near a dangerous area. All these things we don't know. Nonetheless, the argument assumes that because residents of Biggsburg frequented this mall in this central location, that Littleville people will do the same thing. Now, at this point, we can strengthen the argument or we can refute it. Say evidence could possibly come to light that the newly constructed district or zone is really far away from the city, or it's near a dangerous neighborhood, or the roads there aren't convenient, or people in Littlesville typically don't like to travel, or at least the wealthy people typically don't like to travel outside of town. Therefore, it shows that this argument doesn't have any validity whatsoever. So that would be a way to refute it as well. Again, we can kind of strengthen it or refute it. Now, in this case, I didn't actually provide those extra lines the way I did with the previous fallacy, but you get the point that those lines for strengthening or refuting the argument will increase the paragraph by about 3 or 4 lines. And so what we're looking for here is, again, is length. And length is very important on the GMAT argument task. The reason, well, you write a lot, you have a lot to say, and that's going to push you up to the 6. So even if you're eloquent and analytical, but you just don't write that much, you're probably not going to get that 6. Finally, fallacy number 3, because, hey, we like to write a lot. And once you get the hang of this and you feel comfortable doing it, you will be able to write 3 fully developed paragraphs. Third fallacy, economy is the same as 10 years ago. The assumption is that things don't change, but clearly things change. And so here, we have a quick little paragraph. Again, by this time, you may not have as much time to deal with stuff, so it's okay if the third body paragraph is a little bit shorter than the other ones. Finally, the argument claims without warrant that what held true 10 years ago doesn't hold true today. It touches on potential changes in the economic climate. Of course, strengthening the argument, we could add something to the effect of, had the argument shown that the province in which these two cities are is doing the same economically, if not better, then it would strengthen the argument. Of course, without that, though, it's totally up in the air, and hence the argument is not valid. So that's really it. We've said the main stuff, and we get to the conclusion. The essay's basically done. You just want to keep the conclusion, like the intro, short and sweet. And I'm just going to give you a one-sentence conclusion. You know why? Because that is a conclusion. You don't need something florid or even 3 or 4 sentences long. It just needs to wrap everything up the way that this sentence here does. Now, if you have a little bit more time, sure, you can write 1 more sentence, but there's absolutely no reason why your conclusion has to be longer than 2 sentences. So don't fret and sweat if you have a minute or so left and you haven't gotten to your conclusion. Something like this will definitely do the trick.